Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 72 of Fracking Nightmare. Now, last week I was discussing the issue of deep geological disposal and making the observation that with the oil price stagnant around about 45 bucks a barrel, way below the point at which it becomes viable, particularly in the UK, one had to question the real motivation behind the British government's desire to push this agenda forward. And I referred to this document, Implementing Geological Disposal. Now, after last week, I took the opportunity on Tuesday to attend an event that was put on by the radioactive waste management team, who are based out of Harwell, who have the responsibility to effectively prime the British public for the next stage of the radioactive waste management philosophy in this country. So from that meeting, it seems that my concerns and the concerns of others were indeed well founded. So this evening I want to share with you my analysis based on attending that event and also looking at the bigger picture. Now, I will readily acknowledge that nuclear waste management has not exactly been high on my radar, but it is becoming higher by the day. Now, I was first alerted to the prospect of the deep boreholes being utilised for radioactive waste management by a correspondent way back in September of 2014. Now, I invited that person to join me as my guest, but unfortunately the individual declined. So I undertook my own research, and the first reference that I made to this was way back, almost exactly 1 year ago, on episode number 40, which was broadcast on Monday, the 27th of October, 2014. And this is what I said back then. So not only is there an issue with the fact that Third Energy, of course, are ultimately intending to exploit the unconventional gas resources, as indeed is a term of their licensing agreement, but we are also very concerned about this because the re-injection well, of course, opens the proverbial door, maybe even the floodgates, for the government agenda for implementing geological disposal. This is a white paper. It's freely available online. It was published in July of this year. And in this 55-page document, it actually talks about the 100-year agenda to turn the UK into a nuclear waste dump. So this is the government and the unconventional gas industry developing a strategy to use the deep unconventional wells and the re-injection wells at some later date for waste storage, including nuclear waste. And part of the amendment to the infrastructure bill that is currently going through the House of Lords would grant companies the opportunity to deposit anything beneath people's properties without advising them. Now, what that document doesn't discuss, and what the event that I attended last week with radioactive waste management didn't discuss, was the UK's legacy of disposing of nuclear waste. So I decided that I needed to bring myself up to speed. So I'm sure that many of you are not going to be shocked by this, but I certainly was when I discovered the magnitude of the UK's role in contaminating the North Atlantic. So up until 1993, much of the UK's waste was actually dumped at sea. Now, this is from a documentary, and I will tell you what that documentary is a little bit later and encourage you to watch it for yourself. It's a documentary that has never been broadcast in the UK. It was actually made jointly by a French and German documentary team. And they were looking at the role that the UK has played in this contamination process. Now, the UK is not alone, but it is certainly guilty of perpetrating the bulk of this contamination. And what I discovered was that as the waste was being dumped at sea, it wasn't always recorded accurately as to where that waste was dumped. And the reason being was, although the ship's captains were given coordinates as to where the waste needed to be dumped, in reality, they were also operating under a time constraint, i.e. a constraint against which their crew, and themselves, of course, could not be exposed to this radioactive material. So if they were up against inclement weather, rough seas, then once they reached the time limit, then basically over the side of the ship it would go. So consequently, we have a situation where there is nuclear waste all around the coast of the UK and off the coast of France, more of which in a second, which has effectively pretty much contaminated the whole of the northeastern part of the Atlantic, the English Channel, right up into the Arctic Ocean. Now, one of the prime targets for the waste being dumped by the UK producers was Herd Deep. Now, this is very interesting because if you put in a search into search engines looking for Herd Deep, it's not possible, it's difficult to find information in English. It would seem that for whatever reason, the English language search engines don't want you to find too much out about Herd Deep. Probably because anyone looking for Herd Deep is probably going to be looking on the basis of trying to find out a little bit more about the toxic nuclear waste disposal. Now, take a look at this, because this is the Herd Deep Trench running up the Western English Channel here, and it lies to the north and northwest of the Channel Islands. Here's the British Channel Islands here. This is Jersey, this is Guernsey, and this up here is Alderney. Now, this documentary team from France and from Germany went looking for the waste that had been dumped here. They couldn't get any information other than generics from the British establishment, so they hired a boat with an underwater camera and went looking for it. Well, it didn't take them too long, because in their estimate, there are literally tens of thousands of barrels of highly active nuclear waste in this area. And what they discovered shocked them, because many of the barrels are extensively corroded. Now, some weren't, so one perhaps makes the assumption that those that weren't corroded had been in the sea for a lesser period of time. Well, in 1993, the international law was changed to prohibit dumping of toxic nuclear waste at sea. But that didn't really stop the creative juices flowing amongst the engineers responsible for this. So what they did was they didn't dump it at sea. They created pipelines to pump it out from the nuclear facilities out into the ocean. And this is an outflow just off the coast of Cumbria from Sellafield. And this one here is actually also from Sellafield. As you can see, Greenpeace have left their mark. And I have to acknowledge that much of the information that is available today is based on the activities of Greenpeace and their efforts to try and make sure that somebody is at least scrutinising what is going on with this industry, because the governments and the industry certainly don't want that to be the case. This is a picture of the outflow pipe that takes the waste from the nuclear waste from Sellafield out into the ocean. And the irony is that one of the closest beaches to Sellafield a couple of years ago was actually awarded a Clean Beach Award. Yet, this device can be seen going up and down the beaches there. It's called a groundhog. It's a plutonium particle collector. And this is the acknowledgement and the admission, effectively, by the nuclear industry that plutonium is washing up on the beaches of the northwest of England. Here's an article from the Times back in 2005, and this extract says safety breaches at one of Britain's biggest nuclear research stations resulted in hundreds of thousands of radioactive particles escaping into the environment. Highly radioactive waste was pumped into the sea, and evidence of the pollution was covered up by managers who had a reckless disregard for public health, according to Herbert Lyle, a health physics surveyor at the Dounreay plant in Caithness for 30 years. They come as the plant's owner, the UK Atomic Energy Authority, is facing possible criminal prosecution over a series of radioactive leaks. More than 50 radioactive particles have been recovered from a public beach 2 miles west of the plant. The latest find was on Friday when a stone contaminated with cesium-137 was recovered from another beach 20 miles from Dounreay. The authority has admitted that at least several hundreds of thousands of plutonium and uranium particles, each the size of a grain of sand, have been released from Dounreay. And that is what the groundhog is tasked with locating and recovering. Well, one of the unpleasant aspects of this industry is, of course, the side effects and the cancer clusters that have emerged from amongst communities who have the misfortune to live in the shadow of either this industry or close to the dump sites. And this is the statistics pulled together by the documentary team. And here we see some examples of childhood cancer. Now, some cancer specialists have stated that in their opinion, the only way in which leukemia can manifest in children is through contact with something that is radioactive. Now, needless to say, obviously, when the industry is challenged, they always have a ready answer. And in the documentary that I'm going to refer you to later, Tim Parker, who's the head of environmental management at Sellafield, he is quoted as saying, "Public Health England concluded that there is no evidence to link local cases of cancer to our operation." Yet documentation that originates from the 60s, which actually looks at the risks and the benefits that are associated with this industry. So in this extract of benefit and risk balance, and here we have the nuclear power and the benefits being cheap electricity and reduction in air pollution, apparently, and the general benefits, good health, really, entertainment, employment, modern conveniences, affluent society. I mean, this really smacks of a pretty shallow brainstorm, but at the end of the day, they still acknowledged in the risk factor that cancers were a potential side effect. Cancers such as leukemia, CNS cancer, bone tumours, thyroid cancer, etc. And goes on to say sickness and suffering, deformities and physical handicaps, life shortening and early death. So an acknowledgement in the early days of the nuclear industry that there were potential negative health impacts. But those who are associated with the industry can always find a way to justify the negative impacts. And here's a quote from Richard Clark, who sits on the International Commission on Radiological Protection. And he was quoted as saying, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." Now, the International Commission on Radiological Protection is supposedly an independent charity, but it's actually part of the revolving door process of people moving between NGOs and the industry itself, as we shall see more of a bit later. Now, Michael Meacher, who sadly passed literally a couple of weeks ago now, but Michael Meacher was the UK Environment Minister between 1997 and 2003. And when discussing his experiences of the nuclear industry, he said, "Government doesn't want a debate. It just goes along with the official standard view, which actually is the view of the nuclear industry. They certainly don't want anything to probe too deeply. So let's just have a look again at the situation in the Channel Islands, because this is the area, the populated area that's closest to that dumping ground. And here's an article from just 3.5 years ago, in March of 2012, from the Jersey Evening Post. Cancer, the island's deadliest enemy. And the article identifies the fact that cancer rates in the Channel Islands seem to be at least twice that of the general population on the British mainland. Well, of course, whenever such a statistic comes to the fore, then what do? You bring in the experts, and in this case, it's the same experts that Tim Parker of Sellafield was quoting when he said that they couldn't make a link between the cancer clusters in Sellafield and Sellafield's operations. And that's pretty much the same that Public Health England came up with in looking at the cancer statistics in the Channel Islands. And that was a report published in early 2013. And the BBC made the observation as well: ordinary herd deep radioactive waste is not dangerous. Well, of course they're going to say that. It's probably going to be another 25, 30, maybe 50, maybe even 100 years before it is acknowledged that the legacy of the 20th and 21st century nuclear industry has had horrendous negative health impacts on communities. Not least, of course, what occurred in Japan, which is now spreading right across the Pacific Ocean. But the BBC made the observation that radioactive waste dumped in the herd deep off Alderney is not dangerous, according to Guernsey's Environmental Health Unit. Thousands of barrels of low-level radioactive waste, except that it wasn't low-level radioactive waste. In many cases, it was high-level radioactive waste. French and German environmentalists have called for their removal after reports from a German media company, that's referring to the documentary. Tobin Cook, Deputy Environmental Health Officer, said the material was carefully monitored. He said all of the recent readings have shown there isn't a detrimental effect. And then you just got to love this last one. In the event that there was ever a problem, we can obviously take the reasonable precautions and let the public know accordingly. Well, let me give you an example of the British government letting the public know accordingly, because probably one of the most significant cases of public water supply being contaminated was at Camelford in 1988, not too far away from the UK Column Studios here in Plymouth. And this is an article from the 22nd of October 2011. There's a public inquiry into the decade-old, of course it was more than 2 decades old, so an interesting bit of spin there, of course, into the decade-old Camelford water poisoning scandal was demanded yesterday after scientists revealed the first evidence suggesting people who drank the contaminated water may have suffered brain damage. They said aluminium sulfate poisoning probably led to long-term cerebral impairment in some people in Camelford. The finding could trigger a rash of new claims for compensation for one of Britain's worst episodes of pollution. In July 1988, 20 tonnes of aluminium sulfate was accidentally tipped into a drinking water reservoir at Camelford in Cornwall, serving 20,000 people. Well, the Mail Online in 2014, in April of 2014, ran this article, "The Village of the Damned, Mysterious Suicides, Agonising Illness," and now 25 years after the UK's worst case of mass poisoning, the first evidence that dirty water has killed people. Camelford in Cornwall was poisoned with aluminium sulfate in 1988. Now, at the time, A number of people noticed that the water was discoloured and had got a rather bitter taste. And I kid you not, the advice given to people who phoned the local water authority at that time was mix it with orange juice and hold your nose. That was the advice, the official advice given to the residents. Well, nearly 5 years later, 23, no, 20, let me get my maths right here. It is 25 years. September of 2013, the Camelford water poisoning, unreserved government apology. And in the article, in the BBC article, possible cover-up. There's a surprise. The water poisoning happened when the chemical, which is used to treat cloudy water, went straight into the mains water supply. People in the area at the time reported a range of health issues, including stomach cramps, rashes and diarrhoea. Despite the apology, Mr. Rogerson has called for Devon and Cornwall Police to heed a request from the coroner in 2007 to reopen an investigation into the possibility of a cover-up. Dr. Cross backed the call for a police investigation, but has also called for a ministerial inquiry. Well, guess what? So 25 years after the mass contamination of the population in Camelford, the government finally acknowledges that there was indeed a horrific accident, 20 tonnes of aluminium sulphide being pumped into the mains water supply. But surprise, surprise, there has been no criminal investigation and no further government inquiry. So forgive me if I don't exactly have faith in any claim that the government would advise the community of any issues arising from the dumped nuclear waste. They will kick this can down the road as long as possible. Now, we are not the only country in the world that has this problem of what to do with its toxic nuclear waste. So in this first break, we're going to take a look at a trailer for a documentary that was produced in Finland called Into Eternity. And this documentary discusses the Finnish solution to this particular issue.
As you watch this, one basic component behind the long-term safety of Onkalo has failed. Onkalo has been rediscovered.
Mä synnyin täällä 42 vuotta sitten. Vuonna 1965 tänne ei oltu rakennettu vielä mitään. Päällystie loppui tähän.
Tulevaisuudessa. Se voi olla, että tulevaisuudessa ei ole aikaa.
Siis tuli vaan semmoinen tunne, että sieltä on päästävä pois.
So that's a trailer for a Finnish documentary. As you can see, it is subtitled, titled Into Eternity. But the Finns have set the precedent for disposal facilities. And this is what the Finns are proposing. A deep underground facility. In fact, construction has already started. Now, they weren't joking when they put their tongue in their cheek and say that this facility is expected to have a life in excess of 100,000 years, because some of the nuclear waste will be toxic, not just for 100,000, but many hundreds of thousands of years. So the orthodox version of history suggests that the pyramids are something in the region of maybe between 3,500 and 5,500 years old. So we're looking at something here that the Finnish authorities are expecting to last for something in the region of between 20 and 30 times the lifespan of the pyramids. Talk about kicking the can down the road. But as you can see, this is the surface area, and then they're looking at this massive underground facility here. Now, this is located in an area about 250 kilometers northwest of Helsinki. The name of the facility is called Onkalo, which I'm told by a couple of people who speak Finnish that it means equally cave and hidden place. Well, as you're going to see later, in this country, in the UK, we can't even find wells that have been drilled in the last 100 years, and we have no idea who is responsible for them. So can we really believe that a facility is going to be appropriately managed for 100,000 years? I wonder how many iterations of creation we go through in that period. So let's have a look at France. And France's nuclear facility, and they have similar designs to the Finns, and they're looking at a location here. And this is an area called Bure, and as you can see, it is a few kilometers to the west of Nancy and to the southwest of Metz. But it is in a very, very remote part of the country. And the population of this entire area, let's go back there, sorry. The population of this entire area was 85 in 1999, 91 in 2006, and 92 in 2007. The population density of Bure is 5 inhabitants per kilometre squared. The number of houses of Bure was 48 in 2007, which consisted of 40 main residents, 4 second or occasional homes, and 4 vacant properties. And the way in which the French have managed to persuade the 85 residents, or 92 residents, or whatever it is today, of this area is to throw money at them. And they're apparently, to date, they've shared something in the region of about 13 million euro, which just divided by 92 people, obviously is, a reasonable chunk of change. So what about the UK? Well, up until a couple of years ago, the proposition was to build a similar facility in Allerdale in Cumbria. Now, the thinking here was, of course, that the population of Cumbria is already nuclear savvy with Sellafield and Windscale. And that the population would probably be the most amenable in England to accepting this facility on their doorstep. And unfortunately, although the district councils were prepared to run with it, the Cumbria county councillors were not. And in fact, in January of 2013, the Cumbria County Council rejected the proposal for Allerdale to host the Deep Geological Disposal Facility for England. And that article read, plans to look for a site for a 12 billion underground nuclear waste store in Cumbria have been rejected. Cumbria County Council vetoed an advanced stage 4 search for a site for the radioactive waste facility. The stage included detailed geological investigations and discussions over the social and economic implications. The Department of Energy and Climate Change says it was disappointed, but the no vote would undermine the long-term disposal of nuclear waste. There were huge cheers from environmental campaigners outside the council chamber in Carlisle, where the decision was announced. The 10 members of the County Council's cabinet voted 7-3 against continuing with the plans. Well, I must confess that I can quite understand the decision of the 7 councillors not to acquiesce to this proposition, condemning the population of Allerdale to a facility that's got to last in excess of 100,000 years. There are actually also some concerns about the suitability of the geology in Allerdale, but it actually seems that the government and the geologists and the nuclear industry were prepared to compromise the ideal geology in return for having a willing population prepared to accept this facility on their doorstep. Well, nothing much happens then really for the next 18 months until the publication of this document in July of 2014. And this is the document that outlined the current state of play in terms of the temporary storage facility of nuclear waste. Now, I'm told that each country in the UK is responsible for its own decision-making process. So the Scots have effectively said, we're going to do nothing. We're going to effectively continue to store it in the way we store it right now. And, we'll see what manifests in the future in terms of a potential solution. But in England, it seems that the government wants to be gung-ho and go hell for leather for the underground storage facility. And of course, this document outlines the 100-year agenda, but what's 100 years out of 100,000? It's a fraction, a very small fraction of the duration. And by the way, the game plan would be that the facility has spare capacity for the equivalent of 5 Hinkley Cs, but in addition to all the waste that is currently in temporary storage. So this was the proposition that the shafts dropping down into an underground storage facility with, in some of the plans, a vehicle track to actually take the waste material down. Now, obviously, with this in the background and the likelihood that there isn't going to be a community that comes forward to volunteer to host this facility, it is a great concern. And although we thought long and hard about it, we decided to include a short piece about this issue in the documentary Voices from the Gasfields, which I released in April. So this is the clip from Voices from the Gasfields. Since the middle part of 2014, the price of oil has been falling quite dramatically. This has had the effect of forcing the unconventional gas industry into hibernation. Despite the fact that the stock price of the likes of iGas are falling to the levels of junk stock, the UK government seems so determined to push ahead with this agenda. So one has to start asking the question, what is really behind this? Now, I can only conjecture at this juncture, but I would draw people's attention to the white paper produced by the British government last July, which discusses turning the UK into a toxic waste dump. And the means by which they were going to dispose of this waste is through deep wells. Consider the possibility that the industry was already looking at the potential revenue stream from selling off these wells to whomever it is that wants to get rid of this toxic waste. Now, That was released in April. But ever since last October, every single public presentation that I have given, or most conversations that I've had regarding the unconventional gas industry, I have always added the rider that, we have to consider the possibility that the unconventional gas agenda is a Trojan horse. And as the price of oil has just got lower and lower, and now hovers around about $45 a barrel, some 30% below the point at which it is viable, then one has to question what is really behind this. Now, after the Allerdale decision, or the Cumbria decision, not to pursue, and the publication of the document last July, something happened in Parliament in the last week of March. And we have discussed this. We discussed this at the time, and we've mentioned it on a number of other occasions on previous episodes of Fracking Nightmare. And this is the amendment to the Infrastructure Act that effectively labels nuclear waste disposal a significant infrastructure issue and of national importance. And so consequently, the vote was held, and the vote was passed by 277 to 33 to remove all local authority participation in the ultimate decision-making process. Now, it does state that they will still be consulted, but they will not have the power to veto any decision taken at central government level. So let's just roll the clock forward now to the event that I attended in Plymouth that was run by the Radioactive Waste Management Team. And it was titled A Public Consultation on National Geological Screening Guidance. And basically, these are consultations to explain to the wider community what's been going on in terms of the search for a suitable facility. Now, when I arrived there was a relatively small number of people, about 40 people or so, and all sat at round tables, each table holding around about 8 people. And I was really surprised that it was quite a small number, but the bulk of the people in the room were either members of the British Geological Society, students, or academics from Plymouth University. And the person hosting the event was this individual, Ivan Stone. And his title is the snappy title of Stakeholder Engagement and Communications Director. And his biography, it says, Ivan has been involved in delivering nationally significant infrastructure for more than 25 years. He has extensive experience of working with communities, their political representatives, and the media. He has worked extensively in the UK and internationally with organisations including National Grid, HS2, and Midland Expressway, and with regulators, stakeholders, and investors. What it doesn't actually mention is that before he took this role, he was the director of a company called Copper Consultants. And Copper Consultants were actually very much involved in trying to achieve the ultimate buy-in of the community and the elected representatives in Cumbria for the Allerdale facility. And interestingly, there is some suspicion, some conjecture that Ivan Stone was instrumental in actually persuading the British government to hold that controversial vote back in late March. And this is an article from, or an extract from an article from The Ecologist. And this written by Marianne Birkby. In the last act of the dying Parliament, MPs quietly voted to dump democratic planning processes to expedite a facility for the high-level nuclear waste in geologically fractured Cumbria. So, overalling strong and highly effective local opposition, shame on them. Well, the article continues. So, who devised the cunning plan? Whose idea was it to scrap democracy in order to dump nuclear waste? Was the bright idea given to the government by the PR firm Copper Consulting? Copper, a PR firm with offices in London, Bristol and Suffolk, and most recently Cumbria, told the Department of Energy and Climate Change in 2013, following Cumbria's decisive no to a nuclear waste dump, that allowing local authorities to determine the outcome of a process which is designed to deliver a national government policy may not be the most appropriate route. Local authorities are consultees rather than decision makers. A logical conclusion might therefore be to classify the geological disposal facility as a nationally significant infrastructure project. There is a revolving door between the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority and Copper. Ivan Stone, Copper's former executive director, is now the Stakeholder Engagement and Communications Director of Radioactive Waste Management, the new arm of the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. And guess what? Copper have also been awarded the PR job of selling new nuclear build and new nuclear wastes at Moorside to the public. Now, I wasn't aware of this when I attended the meeting in Plymouth last Tuesday, and coincidentally, Ivan Stone, during the round table discussions, came over and sat next to me. And when I broached this subject, and of the democratic deficit being accelerated here by removing local authorities from the decision-making process, he said, well, you know, perhaps it wasn't quite the way you see it, but you know, the explanation that he offered wasn't particularly compelling. So call it a hunch, but I think that the ecologist might actually be onto something. And it would be very interesting to know exactly what role Ivan Stone played in persuading the government to hold this vote. Now, this vote was held without any debate. And what we do know is that many of the 277 MPs who voted in favour of it didn't even know what they were voting for. They simply went from the bar or the restaurant when the division bell rang and followed the guidance of the chief whip. And we know, because of a number of conversations that various people have had with their MPs, that they are now finding themselves in a little bit of difficulty as they try and explain why they voted in favour of this particular bill. Now, the other person participating in this event was Natalie Ayler, and she is the Geological Disposal Facility Siting Director. Now, that's a little clearer, and what that means, it's her job to find a new location for the facility. Natalie has over 25 years' experience working on environmental waste management, energy and infrastructure projects for commercial and government organisations in the UK and internationally, including Sizewell C Power Station, Crossrail and the London 2012 Olympic Park. Now, what it doesn't say is that she also has extensive experience in the oil and gas industry. She's an Aggie. She's a graduate of Texas A&M. And I think she's probably born and raised in McClellan, which is certainly an oilfield town in Texas. Well, Natalie was participating in this conference a couple of years ago at Imperial College, the Oil and Gas Forum. And here's Natalie when she was working for Atkins. And she is a hydrologist, that's her speciality. So she was working for the consultant civil engineers, Atkins, located in Epsom in Surrey. And when I pulled this up, I was quite surprised to see an old colleague of mine, Mark Corrigan. Mark has been with Schlumberger since 1980. He actually joined Schlumberger just a year after I did. Mark is still with Schlumberger, so he's held out for 35 years. And Mark, I promise not to share any of the tales of some of our rather messy nights in Paris until you've actually retired. But good to see your face there, my friend. Anyway, Natalie. Well, here's Natalie actually speaking at Shale UK. And this is from 2013. And here's her bio on the Shale UK page. It says, Natalie is Technical Director of Atkins Water and Environment Business and advises on ground and groundwater contamination, remediation and environmental risks and liabilities associated with oil and gas, energy utility, infrastructure, land regeneration and mergers and acquisitions. So now we start to see something coming together here, because consider the possibility that there isn't any community in the UK that is willing to volunteer to host a nuclear waste disposal facility. If the nuclear tolerant communities in Cumbria are not prepared to accept it, then I think it's a pretty safe bet that there's nobody else in the country, especially if you really do want suitable geology. And I'm advised that the most suitable geology in an area that's not being targeted for unconventional gas exploitation is actually the Clay Basin in the southeast of England. And call it a hunch, but I'd say the chances of establishing a toxic nuclear waste deep disposal facility in the southeast of England are slim to absolute none. Well, if the idea of disposing of toxic nuclear waste in a deep well originally drilled for unconventional gas exploitation perhaps seems a little bit of a stretch, well, take a look at this. This is from April of this year, and this is from the University of Sheffield, and an article here. Here's the proposition: bury nuclear waste down a very deep hole, say Sheffield scientists. Technologies that will enable nuclear waste to be sealed 5 kilometres below the Earth's surface could provide a safer, cheaper and more viable alternative for disposing of the UK's high-level nuclear waste. Scientists at the University of Sheffield calculate that all of the UK's high-level nuclear waste from spent fuel reprocessing could be disposed of in just 6 boreholes 5 kilometres deep, fitting within a site no larger than a football pitch. Professor Fergus Gibb of the University of Sheffield's Faculty of Engineering explained, deep borehole disposal is particularly suitable for high-level nuclear waste such as spent fuel, where high levels of radioactivity and heat make other alternatives very difficult. Much of the drilling expertise and equipment to create the boreholes already exists in the oil and gas and geothermal industries. A demonstration borehole, such as is planned in the USA, is what is now needed to move this technology forward. So all the pieces of the jigsaw are starting to fall into place. You bring people into the radioactive waste management team who have previously been involved with the unconventional gas strategy development, and ultimately you bring the two together. So unconventional gas, fracking, shale, probably not coal bed methane, because arguably that may not be deep enough, but shale, and even outrageously, even the underground coal gasification may not be for underground coal gasification. Maybe it's actually to create a facility, an underwater facility for the deep geological disposal with surface entry, because it has to be surface entry, because if it's at sea, then it will be classified as dumping at sea. But as we've seen, if you actually dump it at sea from the land, then that gets around the legislation. So the anti-fracking communities around the UK actually need to be cognizant of this. I'm not suggesting it's definitely going to happen, and there's no doubt that Ivan Stone and Natalie Ayler will completely ignore everything that I've presented here, because they certainly won't want to bring this into the discussion in any way, shape or form, because this is the magician's trick. They'll be going around the country talking about a deep geological disposal facility, knowing very well that they're not going to get one established, and ultimately they'll just start using, if they're drilled, the deep wells that have been drilled to extract unconventional gas. So the National Geological Screening Consultation, the regional workshops, which weren't particularly well publicised. In fact, I don't think the schedule was even published until the latter part of September. And it's clear that attendance was preferred just from students, geologists and other academics. And unfortunately, there is only one event remaining in this schedule, and that's this coming Thursday at Manchester, at the Mercure in Manchester Piccadilly, and that's a daytime event running from 11 o'clock until 3 o'clock. Now, you do have to reserve your place, and I mean, I do acknowledge there's a very strong possibility that on the basis that places seem to be limited to about 50 people, there may be no further places available. But if you can get a place, I absolutely encourage you to go along and listen to what Ivan Stone and Natalie Ayla have to say. Now, I said I would refer to the documentary that I took a lot of information from in the first part of the show, and this is the documentary. If you search for radioactive waste dumped and forgotten, it's actually mirrored at the request of the producers of the documentary, because they know very well that there's a strong possibility that this documentary may be removed. Certainly, this documentary has never appeared on British TV, but it has apparently appeared in both France and Germany. So that's radioactive waste dumped and forgotten. Now, we're going to take another short break. And in this break, we're going to take a look at a scene, another scene from Into Eternity, the documentary about the Finnish nuclear waste disposal facility.
So we are storing the waste today above ground in water pools. The reason why it's kept in water pools is that water creates a shield for radiation.
Keeping the waste in tanks, this is probably possible for the next 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, 1,000 years.
You just can't guarantee stable conditions above ground, for instance, for 100 years, let alone thousands of years. These storages, they need surveillance, they need power in order to cool the water pools, they need maintenance.
So that's the second documentary that I absolutely encourage you to find the time to watch in full, Into Eternity, because the Finns are a decade plus ahead of where the British government claims it wants to be. Yet, as I'm alluding to, perhaps there is absolutely no intention whatsoever of ever building a deep geological disposal facility in the UK. Instead, they use the infrastructure created by the unconventional gas industry. And consider the problem of orphan wells. Now, I just want to take a second to define an orphan well, because an orphan well is not the same as an abandoned well. An abandoned well is what is happening at Crawberry Hill right now, where Rathlin Energy are effectively ensuring the integrity of the well, we hope, before sealing it, and then they will restore the area to its former agricultural glory. But whilst we know that Rathlin are responsible for that well, and whilst Rathlin are a viable entity, and I'll use that term very loosely, then it is an abandoned well. But if Rathlin go belly up and file for bankruptcy, and there's no one to pick up their liabilities or their assets, or indeed their responsibilities, at that point, then the well becomes an orphaned well. In other words, nobody has actual responsibility for it. Now, here's an observation from that article. It says, plans to expand shale gas in the UK must learn from leaks and poor monitoring at existing onshore oil and gas sites. A review of 2,152 wells drilled from 1902 to 2013 found up to 100 orphaned wells for which no firm is responsible. Only 2 cases of well failure were recorded, one of which was iGas, by the way, at Singleton in Sussex, if my memory serves me correctly. But legacy sites are not monitored for leaks. So we've just been talking about fantasy plans to develop a facility that's going to have a 100,000-year life, and yet wells that have been drilled in the last century, we have no idea for a number of them who is responsible for them. And in some cases, we don't actually know where they are because nature has recovered the area. So this was done by Refine, and Refine is the research for fracking in England. And this wasn't exactly a neutral body. This was funded by the Natural Environment Research Council, Shell, Total and Chevron. And so call it a hunch, but I'm sure they sanitise that report as best they can. But even they acknowledge that of the 8,030 wells targeting the Marcellus Shale inspected in Pennsylvania between 2005 and 2013, 6.3% were reported to the authorities for infringements related to well barrier or integrity failure. And the reality is that if we're looking at the 10 to 20,000 wells that the UK government thinks it's going to drill to provide 10% of the UK gas demand over the next couple of decades, then a 6% failure rate is going to potentially be catastrophic. Now, of course, in the first instance, if the purpose of the wells is to extract a little bit of gas, but ultimately, of course, the purpose then is to deposit the nuclear waste. And what better way of getting rid of cancer clusters? Because you simply create a situation where the whole country is toxic. So no clusters anymore. So you simply just say, no, I'm afraid that the cancer statistics in this area are exactly the same as anywhere else. And of course, for viewers of Humanity vs. Insanity, you will know that there are actual treatments which can deal with cancer, which are suppressed by Big Pharma and the British government. So, well, that's a massive topic. There are some other factors that I'm just going to very, very quickly mention because they are pertinent to this week. And a couple of days ago, the Upton Community Protection Camp, which has been in the field there adjacent to Chester Zoo now for 18 months. And last week, documents were served that the land had been acquired, the lease had been formally acquired by iGas, and then iGas served eviction papers. So if you are unable to get a ticket to attend the Manchester radioactive waste management event, then maybe you go along to the civil courts in Manchester to show your support, your solidarity. The hearing for the eviction of the Upton Protection Community is scheduled to start at 10:30 a.m. on Thursday morning. So now, with everything that we've been discussing tonight, it absolutely endorses the philosophy that what we need to resist these attacks on the British population are the increase in community groups. We actually now have over 450 community groups. So that's an increase of some 50% since I first put up this slide I think 4 months ago. And of course, the two most significant events that have occurred in that time are the 14th round licensing announcements and of course Professor Avril MacDonald making the observation that women are not able to understand fracking and basically should get back in the kitchen. And that seems to have done us a lot of favours in terms of the recruitment drive. So tomorrow night, Tuesday, no doubt I'll probably see a visit from the bailiffs, seeing as they've been unable to serve me the papers they wanted to serve me in Plymouth. So, hey, come into the meeting, make yourself known, and maybe you can explain what the papers purport to. But this is billed as an evening with Ian Crane. I'm not sure that that's how I would have billed it, but nonetheless, we will be talking unconventional hydrocarbons, we will be talking deep geological disposal, and we will be talking community action groups. So, finally, last week, 38 Degrees produced a short promo video to help raise further awareness about the insidious third energy agenda to frack the well at Kirkby Misperton, a well that is located less than 1 kilometre from the entrance to Yorkshire's biggest revenue generator, Flamingo Land. And of course, the entire village of Kirkby Misperton sits between the well and the entrance to Flamingo Land. So no buffer zone at all. And now with what I've shared today, of course, Third Energy and of course the British government will deny that there is any connection whatsoever to the desire to frack KM8 and the ultimate agenda for deep geological disposal. And in all probability, we're not going to know whether that's the case for another 20, 25 years or so. But precautionary effect comes into play, and the community groups scrutinising what is going on in their communities will help resist this insidious agenda. Thanks for joining me tonight. I will be back next week with episode 73 of Fracking Nightmare.